Good afternoon, everyone, and Masa al Khair in Arabic, and welcome to today's webinar, Why Digitize Construction, Market Outlook and Growth. My name is Suhail Masri, and I will be your moderator. I work at Tendered as a general manager for Tendered KSA, Saudi Arabia, and I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar today. As you know, Tendered is a heavy equipment rental marketplace. We are a technology company, and our technology supports the rental activities of companies who rent in and rent out their equipment. So we are, unlike traditional rentals, we use technology to enable the entire supply chain from A to Z. As you know, the topic for today is very interesting because it talks about construction digitization and how to digitize construction. And I think that this industry is entering the digital age, and it is ripe and it is ready for this disruption. We all know that the construction is one of the least digitized industries. And we know that the R&D spending in construction runs well behind that of others. I mean, I know that less than 1% of revenues coming from construction R&D versus 3 to 5 or even 6% with some other industries like auto industries and aerospace industries. And believe me, productivity, as per all reports, it says that construction, the productivity of construction industry has grown around 5 to 6% since 1945, compared to many-fold with other industries like agricultural and manufacturing industries. So I think the push and the pressure that is accelerating for digitizing this industry, and this pressure is coming from like several complementary directions. Right now, we receive calls from contractors, from companies asking for more complicated demands. They need to track the performance of the machines. They need energy optimization. They need improved security. And we all know that even the technological capabilities right now is huge. We are talking about robots. We are talking about drones these days, in addition to the fact that we have a lot of tech-savvy engineers and people who are ready to work in innovating new technologies for this industry. The great thing about this is that the community in general and the governmental bodies are accepting and adopting this change, and they are pushing for that change and for digitization of this industry. So it's important that we note, while the necessary revolution can be a threat if we don't approach it properly, but I'm sure that it is a land of opportunities, opportunities for cost efficiency, opportunities for better client experience, and for sure, it's an opportunity for offer differentiation in general. So to cover this topic, it's my pleasure to welcome our esteemed panelists, Mr. Dmitry Lykov, the regional segment manager at Leica Geosystems, Mr. Edward James, Director Content and Analysis at MEED Middle East, and last but not least, Mr. Arjun Mohan is the CEO and the founder of Tendered. And before I hand the microphone over to Arjun, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this webinar. First, this webinar is already, we are recording this webinar and it will be sent to you by email. We would love to hear from you during the discussion. So please, if you have any question, write your question on the Q&A tab on this webinar, and we will answer your questions at the end of the sessions. And if we don't get to your questions during the webinar, I promise that we will follow up with you afterward. remember that there is an iPhone 11 waiting for a winner. So there will be a raffle after this series of webinar, and you are all part of this raffle, of course. And the winner's name will be announced via email later on. So without any further ado, I would like to kick off this session by welcoming Mr. Arjun Mohan, the CEO and the founder of Tendered. Arjun, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. As Suhail mentioned, my name is Arjun. I'm the CEO of Tendered. So Tendered is a startup, and the idea for our startup came about 3 years ago when I was working in San Francisco. I was working in San Francisco for about 5 years, and before that, I was studying and working in Toronto. But long ago, I was actually born here in the UAE, and I've kind of come full circle to be able to share this presentation with you. So let's jump into the slides and give it a couple of seconds to load. So Tendered is an equipment rental marketplace. What does that mean? Essentially, we bring the best equipment in the market, either from contractors or equipment rental companies, and we register it on our platform. Then we make it really easy for companies like general contractors or manufacturers to access the listings and to book it in a really simple and cost-effective way. Over the last 2.5 years, we've been working in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and we've worked with hundreds of clients. At this very moment, we have over 7,000 pieces of equipment registered on our marketplace. Let's take a step back and think about the construction industry and why we found it an attractive opportunity. Construction is big business. In 2020, it's about $11 trillion business. By 2025, we expect it to grow to a $15 trillion business. Now, how big is a trillion? To give you some perspective, if you wanted to count from 1 to 1,000,000, how long do you think it would take? It roughly takes about 11 days. But if you wanted to count to 1 trillion, how long do you think it takes? It takes 32,000 years. It's an astronomical number, and it's a really huge industry. It's also one of the biggest consumers of raw materials in the world.
Yeah. Arjun?
But yes?
I don't think that we can see the presentation. So can make sure that it is shared with us.
Can you see it?
Perfect. Okay, done.
All right. So I was presenting without the presentation, but it's okay. So a lot of the growth for the industry is coming from emerging markets. So markets like Middle East, Africa, and Asia. And it's also one of the oldest industries in the world. You know, about 4,500 years ago, it started shaping the face of the earth. And since then, it has been changing the shape of the earth. It also has continued to evolve eventually. It doesn't happen as fast as other industries, as Suhail mentioned, but it is an eventuality. Now, we talked about the size of construction, the history of construction, and how it is evolving. But how do the current events like COVID-19 affect the construction industry? We were really curious, so we went and we asked the market, your peers, what they thought. How did they feel COVID-19 affected the evolution and digitization of the construction industry? Well, 72% of the participants said that COVID-19 has been an accelerant for digitization. For example, look at the Zoom conference we are on right now. I'm sure many of you received invitations for webinars over the last 2 months. But what about 6 to 7 months ago? How many invitations did you receive? The thing is, digitization doesn't only happen on the site, but it's across all your different business units. It's your sales function, your finance function, your marketing function. All of these different business units are getting disrupted and digitized. We were also really curious about how spending patterns are changing due to COVID-19. And surprisingly, 75% of your peers said that they want to shift their business to an asset-light model. And this makes a lot of sense. Businesses don't want to spend from their balance sheet. Because if you spend from your balance sheet too heavily, you become less agile and you have less free cash to invest in new ideas and working capital. But let's take this idea of an asset-light model and dig a little deeper. If you talk to any business and you ask them to predict their demand over a 5-year or 10-year horizon, it usually looks something like this, a linear growth line up to the top right. And based on this predicted demand, you need to increase your capacity to satisfy this demand. And you're going to invest in infrastructure, so people, facilities, equipment, etc. And it usually looks like this. It's a step-by-step process. It's not a gradual process. But what happens in the real world? What does demand really look like? It looks a lot more like this. Even though your demand follows the same trend line as your predictions, the short-term variability, so the 6-month, 1-year variability, dips a lot and spikes a lot. And what does this cause? For example, over here, you have huge capital investment and large capacity, but the demand is really low. So this situation could be something like COVID-19. But due to the dip in demand, you delayed your investment in capital expenses, and that cost a lost opportunity here because you had less capacity than the demand, so you lost the business that was available for you. So what would the ideal model look like? In the ideal model, you want your capacity to match your demand. So if your demand increases, you want more capacity just in time. And if your demand decreases, you want to be able to reduce your capacity along with demand. So that's something like an on-demand capacity model. So with this model, you never lose out on business, and you also don't over-invest in your business. But if this is an ideal model, why haven't more companies adopted something like this? We were really curious, so we went to the market and we asked your peers again. And they gave us 2 main reasons: the cost of service and the quality of service. Because if you want an on-demand capacity model, you need to work with a lot of vendors who can provide you that capacity on a variable or an on-demand basis. And if you're working with vendors outside of your organization, you really don't know what their compliance policies are, if they're going to deliver the goods on time, what are the quality of those goods, and any mistakes from their end affect the end product you deliver to your customer. So the reputation risk, the penalties due to inferior products, they all fall on you. And that's why a lot of companies are hesitant to go onto an on-demand model and work with vendors who can provide you with on-demand capacity. What's the solution? Well, the biggest skill businesses need to adopt now is vendor management. And when we talk about vendor management, it's not the one-off transactional negotiations you have with your customers, but it's about a holistic approach. Look at the big picture. Lay out all the different business units in your company. So your finance, your administration, operations, sales, marketing, all your different departments. Lay it out and look at which services are mission critical and you have to keep it internal, and which services can be outsourced to vendors. And then you need to look at the different vendors and do a cost benefit analysis with the vendors in the market and your own in-house teams to figure out what is the best for you. This is also a great opportunity to bring in digital friendly vendors. Because if you're able to bring in digital friendly vendors into your different business units, you organically start transforming the overall organization into a digital organization. The data collected within each business unit can be shared, and then you can make better decisions as a whole. Now, this is not easy. It usually takes about 6 months to a year, but doing this homework will make your company a lot more lean, agile, and sustainable for the long run. Another thing to watch out for is you need to bring in specialists. Don't bring in generalists. You don't want your audit service provider to run your sales function, and you don't want your marketing service provider to run your operations function, right? You want the best in class. So bring in specialists so that you have better quality of service as well as better data. Now, at Tendered, we focus on equipment rental, just equipment rental. That is the procurement category we are simplifying and we are digitizing. Why equipment rental? In our sector, construction, plant, and machinery is a huge part of your CapEx. All the equipment, the yard, the operators, the depreciation, the finance cost to service all of this is a huge part of your balance sheet. And we feel it can be done in a much more efficient way if done digitally. Since we launched, we've been mentioned by numerous publications, and a lot of our clients love us. One of the reasons that really makes them love us is because we built our product from scratch, bottom up, specific to our user, which is the heavy equipment industry. You can't take a third-party product and try and customize it for your industry, especially for heavy equipment managers. They appreciate specialists, and we took special care to make sure we meet all their requirements. Now, usually we never preview our product publicly, but since this is a closed setting, we thought it would be a good opportunity for us to share this with you and how the Tendered experience looks like. So when you log into Tendered, you're greeted with 3 options: order machines, manage machines, or track GPS data. In this presentation, we're only going to show you how to order machines. When you click order machines, you can select the type of equipment you want. Let's say it's a bulldozer. And at that point, you're greeted with the entire fleet list of dozers in the Tendered marketplace. You can look at the capacity, the price, and add it to your cart. But at this point, you might also need a truck. Now, if you wanted a truck, traditionally, you would have to run an entire new RFQ process for vehicle procurement. But here on Tendered, on one single interface, you can pick all the different types of equipment you want. Once you add all the equipment you need to the cart, you can review the capacity, year, and price. You can also generate a price comparison report that would show how this price compares to all the other prices in the market. Once you click next, you select where you want the equipment and when you want the equipment. And at that point, it starts generating a quotation. But we are also notifying the supplier. We are checking the availability of the equipment, we're checking the documents, and we are making sure it's ready for mobilization. And boom, you have a quotation where you can review the finer details. You can also check who is your relationship manager at Tendered to take care of you. If everything looks right and you want to approve the quotation, you e-sign it within the platform. This process would usually take about a month, at least a couple of weeks. Here it took you less than 2 minutes. You have an order ID and you know exactly when the equipment is going to be delivered. You see, a process that usually takes several weeks now takes a couple of minutes. So you really have to think about how valuable are those weeks to you as a business. Now, we have a lot more features on the Tendered platform that I would love to share with you, but we just don't have enough time. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to keep the conversation going and talk to you more about our story and what we're doing at Tendered. If you're in UAE, please call Alec. And if you're in the Saudi Arabia, please call Suhail. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Now I'm going to hand it off to Suhail.
Thank you, Arjun. Very interesting discussion and, of course, nice slides. Right now, I would like to welcome Mr. Edward James from MEED. Ed, over to you, please.
Thank you, Suhail. Afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well in these challenging times. And I'm going to, over the next 10 minutes or so, give a slightly different presentation on the projects market in the GCC region and looking at some of the data and what's happening in the market in terms of contract awards, how each market is performing in light of COVID-19 and lower oil prices. So those of you who don't know me, I work for MEED Projects. MEED Projects is an online project tracking tool. So for contractors or consultants, suppliers, clients, if you are looking to win work on projects, then we cover all major projects in the region over $10 million. And currently there are about 15,000 active projects across the MENA region. And it's by tracking these projects that we're able to quantify the trends that you're about to see over the next 10 minutes in my deck. As Suhail mentioned, this presentation is being recorded. I'm sure this presentation will be made available to you as well. So if you don't worry if you can't remember everything, record everything today, you will have an opportunity to look at it later in your own time, at your own pace. And as Suhail also mentioned, I'll be happy to take questions you might have on this at the end of the 3 presentations today. Okay, so let's kick off by looking at contract awards in the first 6 months of this year, compared with the first 6-month period of previous years in the GCC. So here we have the values of contracts awarded for the GCC as a whole. And as you may be able to see here, in 2020, from January to June, we saw $35.7 billion worth of contracts awarded across all sectors. Now that unfortunately is a 19% decline on the first 6 months of 2019, where we saw $44.2 billion of contracts awarded, and is a far cry from the nearly $86 billion of awards in 2015, when the oil prices started falling. Now, whether or not you can attribute this 20% fall year on year on COVID-19 low oil prices is debatable, given that the market has been in decline anyway, as you can see, over the last six years or so. But nonetheless, we're clearly in a contracting phase of the market. And I guess the question on everyone's lips now is, are we at the bottom of the market? Are we going to start seeing an improvement in the second half of the year and a growth in the overall market over the years ahead? So let's take that same data and look at it by different countries in the GCC, and actually paints quite a different story. So as you can see here, the worst affected market over the last 6 months has been the UAE. So last year, in January to June, we saw about $16 billion of contracts awarded in the UAE. This year, first 6 months, we saw about $11 billion. So quite a substantial fall, as you can see on the furthest right-hand side. And the market, which was until last year the biggest market, is now is falling quite rapidly. On the other hand, we've actually seen fairly limited falls in contract project activity in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman, and even an increase in project activity in Kuwait, albeit from a lower base. So you can see that while Qatar, Saudi, and Oman have fallen by $1 billion or $2 billion, that the falls have not been at a rate that most would have thought would have been the case given the pandemic and lower oil prices. In fact, the markets seem to have been holding their own. Nonetheless, we can still see that the markets are very much smaller than they were in 2015 and 2016. So when we are looking overall at the region, yes, it's been hard hit, but some countries have been harder hit than others. So that was the total aggregate data on a GCC and country level. Now, what about on a sector basis? So here on these 2 graphs, we can see contract levels by sector over equivalent periods year on year. On the left-hand side, we have the whole MENA region, and we have the breakdown of contract awards by sector for the last 4 years. For the January to May period, and we can see that the worst affected sector has been the construction market. You can see that in the first 5 months of the year, there was a 38% fall year on year in overall new contracts awarded, from about $21 billion in 2019 to approximately $13 billion this year. On the other hand, other sectors have actually gone up. In some cases, transport sector has increased year on year, power to gas as well, and other sectors not hit quite as bad. So construction has fallen the most. However, it is still easily the largest single sector in the region, both in terms of value of work awarded and in terms of number of projects. And if we, on the right hand side, we have similar breakdown of data, but this time just for May, just to highlight just how hard the market was affected during the lockdown periods in April and May. As you can see, across the board, every single sector hard hit, which is perhaps not really a surprise given that economic activity levels were very low. All right, so let's look a little bit more at those numbers and understand them from a different perspective. So we know that COVID-19 has had an impact, and since the 1st of March, when we've been looking at projects, we've identified more than 1,300 projects in the GCC region which have been delayed, suspended, or outright cancelled as a direct result of COVID-19. You can see that the two biggest markets affected have been Saudi Arabia at with 529 projects suspended, delayed, 383 in the UAE, and nearly 200 in Qatar, and in total, nearly more than 1,300. Of course, the UAE and Saudi Arabia stand out in this graph, but it should be, of course, mentioned that they are also the two largest project markets in terms of number of projects, so that's not necessarily a surprise. So while we've seen $463 billion of projects negatively affected by COVID-19, the picture in terms of sectors is also quite interesting to look at. So we can see that the largest sector impacted by COVID-19 has been construction, with about 580 projects delayed or suspended or cancelled. However, that 580 projects is only 16% of all construction projects in the GCC. On the other hand, we've seen 443 transport projects, i.e. roads, buildings, airports, ports, etc., which represents 32% of all projects in that sector. So as a proportion, sectors like gas and transport have been far more affected than sectors like petrochemicals, power, or construction. And we can take that data and we can look at it in terms of a risk bubble matrix like this, and we can see how some sectors, when you take into account the number of projects, the size of the market, are certainly at higher risk than others. So leading the risk metric is the transport, which is considered the riskiest sector based on the number of projects delayed or postponed, followed by the gas sector and then water. And then we have quite a big gap between them and the construction, power, oil, industrial, and chemical sectors, which seem to be a little less impacted. As you can see here, the size of the bubbles indicate the size of the sector, and the higher they are on the chart, the larger number of projects are. So while we've seen a lot of construction projects affected, actually as a proportion of the overall number of projects, much less so than, say, transport or gas projects. So let's look at how the data has influenced our forecasts for the remainder of the year in terms of project spending. So we know that last year in 2019, there were $105 billion of contracts awarded in the GCC. And then in January, we forecast the amount of work to be spent in 2020, and our forecast was $127 billion of projects to be awarded this year. Now, a lot of that, 20 billion of that, was actually from the Qatar LNG program. Nonetheless, we were forecasting, even without that, a small growth in the projects market this year. However, following the slowdown in project awards this year, we've revised down our forecast, and now in the best case scenario, with a sort of rapid return to activity, we're looking at something like $83 billion worth of contracts to be awarded this year. And in a worst case scenario, something like $61 billion of contracts to be awarded. In either scenario, this is considerably lower than our original forecast in January of $127 billion, and certainly less than last year's figure of $105 billion. So all in all, it's going to be a pretty bad year for the projects market, as we might have expected given the situation. Now, longer term, when looking at 2021 and 2022, we've also done some forecasts on the best case and worst case scenario. We use best cases and worst cases because, of course, the situation is very fluid. And you can see here how contract awards have been declining over time as the oil prices fell in 2014, 15. And we can see here, I already mentioned best case and worst case scenarios for 2020. In 2021, our best case forecast based on the pipeline of projects and their timeframes, we see just over $105 billion of contracts to be awarded, and in a worst case, just over $80 billion of contracts, and slightly up on that in 2022 on a best case and worst case scenario. So we have, obviously pretty challenging environment right now and over the next couple of years. But it is important to stress that each situation, each country is very different. The outlook for each country is quite different as well. And then there's also a different outlook on a sector by sector basis as well. So that's all from me. If you have any questions, please put them into the question box. I'll be happy to answer them after the next presentation. And just to add as well, if you are interested in any of the MEED products, there is a special voucher code which will be shared with you for a $500 off a MEED products for those who attend today. Contact attended for more information on that, or alternatively get in touch with me. So thank you very much for that, and I'll be happy to now pass over to Suhail again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, very much. Very insightful. Thank you so much. I have already received a couple of questions for you, so I will be asking you these questions in the question and answer session after the presentations. And for your generous offer for the coupon, we will be sharing that with everyone after the webinar and in the email that will be sent. Thank you again, Ed. And now I would love to welcome, I would like to welcome Mr. Dmitry from Leica. Dmitry, over to you, please.
Thank you, Suhail. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending this session today. I hope it's quite interesting. Let me share my screen with the presentation. Hope it is visible. I just want to make sure. Suhail, could you please check?
Yes, it is. I can see it.
Okay, very good. Right. So my name is Dmitry Lykov, and I represent a company called Leica Geosystems here in Middle East. Slightly about me, I'm over 15 years experience working with heavy machinery brands such as Volvo and CNH. And within Leica Geosystems, I'm responsible for heavy construction solutions across Middle East, Africa, Central Asia, and CIS. So it's quite a bigger region than GCC. And our headquarters is based here in Dubai for the entire region. So today I would like to speak a bit more in details about digitalization in the construction market and how do we see it here in Leica Geosystems and what kind of solutions do we provide to address the demand which is growing. So our understanding of reality of the capital projects currently is that around 20% of bigger projects, they are over schedule, which inevitably leads to more spendings to ramp up the speed of construction. So big number of projects, almost 80%, they become over budget. And the reality of these projects today is still have challenges. And for example, challenge number one is the pressure to keep operating margins down, which is understandable. There is a need to increase productivity and reduce project time to reduce this number of time spent on the projects. Increased requirements from governmental authorities and public administrations, which is true. We also understand that there is a need to improve safety and reduce human error, especially now there is another demand which is growing to reduce face-to-face interaction, or as we call it, social distancing. And as we all notice, projects from year on year, they become more and more complex. But what are the major challenges if we sum it up? First of all, any projects, whenever it is being done, it should be on budget. Secondly, it should be right on time and on specification. But ultimately, everything within the project should be safe. So safety is first. Here on this picture, you can see the so-called yellow metal, the machines around the construction site, various names like motor graders, dump trucks, crawlers, skid steer loaders, etc., etc. This is all we call analog machines. So everything is can be touched, everything has hot buttons, and the machines can be operated with levers. But if we look from a different perspective, there are also various steps of industrial revolutions going on. And does anyone know what does Industry 4.0 mean? Well, quite a new word in the reality. However, if we look from the past, it's not that new. And basically, if we look into the time span from 18th century, where the mechanization, steam power, and various mechanisms started to be implemented in the production, that part of the development was called Industry 1.0. Step by step, we moved to 20th century, and in the end of 20th century, we had so-called Industrial Revolution, or Industry 3.0, when automation was presented in the industry, computers, electronics. Currently, in the beginning of 2021, in 21st century, we meet cyber physical systems, Internet of Things, networks that all over us. So construction 4.0, this is, as we call it, part of Industrial Revolution 4.0. And here on the map, we can see autonomous vehicles, we can see mechanization of construction process supported by digital technologies that are aimed to help people operating the machines to do that in a more precise and productive manner. At the same time, we can see here that the data, as long as machines are digitized, the data needs to be exchanged between them simultaneously on the fly. So in Leica Geosystems, as a part of Hexagon, what do? Is we call it smart change of life of infrastructure. So if I change the pointer. So if we start from the field, we have solutions tailored to capture existing surface. Then there are solutions to prepare the design of any asset that needs to be constructed. Ultimately, we move into the stage of construction, where deploy numerous technologies to automate or digitize machines. And ultimately, in the end of the construction process, we offer our customers solutions that help to maintain assets. So what does construction Industry 4.0 mean to us? First of all, this is ultimate connectivity. Everything is connected with everything. So we speak about Internet of Things. Real-time machine-to-machine and machine-to-office communication, which is important to stay productive and stay accurate. Shared environment. So all projects, all designs, and the data received from machines or field surveyors is always updated through the cloud, and anyone who needs access to it gets it in a very short time. Scanning technology, integration into construction process. Remote operations, which is quite important in this moment in time. So monitoring and control from a remote location what's happening on the construction site. Productivity analysis. So there is no more need to go directly on site to check what's happening. So which machine is more productive, which machine is less productive. It can always be done remotely with solutions from Leica Geosystems. Progress analysis or awareness. People managing the construction site, they can track the progress online. And of course, all these systems, all these solutions, they help to limit face-to-face interaction between people. However, the productivity can still be at a very high level or even has capacity to grow. Right, the solution for that is called Leica Icon, or as we call it, intelligent construction. So basically, this is the solution for every piece of iron, whatever it is, excavator, dozer, concrete or asphalt, paving system, or milling machine, or compaction. Whatever the machine is, we tailor solutions to automate it, to help operator to maintain his or her functions at a very high productive level. So just to summarize and show how the machines are being deployed on site with machine control solutions, I'll show you various pictures. So this is the excavator, and ultimately this is the machine control panel that shows operator the project, position of the machine in the project, and position of cutting edge of the bucket relative to the project and design surface. So everything can be tracked from the cabin, especially this run screen can be seen remotely from any computer in the world that has access to that machine, which is secure communication. Excavator can also be operated in the areas where the attachment is not visible from the cabin. However, with the help of the system, you can still get the information on the positioning of the attachment. Crawler cranes with vibratory compactor attachments. You can position the attachment straight away, no matter what it is, what visibility is, day and night, dust, rain. You can perform at a very high level of productivity. Bulldozers, motor graders, they can allow the accuracy almost up to sub-centimeter accuracy. Total station controlled asphalt or concrete pavers. Compactors. Basically, this is the diagram of what has been installed on the grader. We have the satellite receiver, we have satellite antennas, we have necessary sensors installed throughout the machine, and the machine control panel, which is connected to the machine wirelessly. Alternatively, to improve the accuracy on site, we can provide the solution with the total station. Then the operation of the machine is visible on the screen. You can even have the option of auto point logging as long as machine moves. What are the on-site challenges with grading? So conventional fine grading, you can see here the cross-section view of the graded surface. So the experienced operator can deliver plus minus 3 centimeter grading accuracy. And the average paved surface, which is the most expensive material on site, is roughly 130 millimeters. If we move to automated fine grading, we can see that the accuracy has grown and the sub-centimeter grading accuracy has been achieved. Then when the layers are all evenly spread and fine graded, the average paved surface thickness is 2 centimeters less compared to conventional grading. So you can easily calculate the savings on the deployment of automated fine grading on your site. So now I would like to move to the case study, which has been done on 2 identical stretches of land, and the plan was to build up a road. So the stakeout has been made, excavation and ground leveling, profiling, and fine grading. And on top of that, the as-built check has been made all the time. So ultimately, here we have the comparison table of the time spent and the productivity gain or the savings in time. This is conventional and this is automated. So for those 80 meters of road, 2 identical stretches, the conventional method took almost 1 full day, and automated just half a day. Then we can calculate easily the spending on the fuel. You can see the saving here. And then we move into the savings on the labor, on the manpower. So how many hours each team spend, surveyors, operators, laborers, and we can see the saving here. Then we can also see the actual as-built difference. which is conventional. So the number of points measured, they stayed within the required tolerance, and with automated solution, so the difference is visible. The fine grading, the conventional method led to 45% of the points which were in the tolerance, and only 2% of points were out of the tolerance with automated method. So basically, what we generate with automated solutions or machine guided or machine controlled solutions: high accuracy and speed of operation, real-time grade and slope control, fewer passes that allow saving on fuel and maintenance of the machine, saving on survey, as built in idle time of the entire site, predictable consumption of costly material, in our case this is asphalt, less requirement to operate the skills and less rework on site, and system is fully operational 24/7, 365. Site safety is much increased. So basically, this is it what I wanted to present today, and I'm happy to hand over the speech to Suhail.
Yes. Thank you, Dmitry, for your presentation. Thank you, Arjun, Dmitry, and Edward, for the very insightful information you shared with us. I think we are now going to take questions. As a reminder for attendees, you can still submit questions through the Q&A in your attendee control panel. So the first question that I would ask that we received from everyone, from attendees, for tendered, being in the market for almost 2.5 years, as mentioned by Mr. Arjun, what makes customers and suppliers come back to tendered?
I think when you're ordering equipment, it's not really a discretionary purchase. It's something you need to buy. And then it's not that we keep selling our customers or our suppliers again and again. It's once they experience the buying experience or the selling experience on the tendered platform, there really is no other reason to use the traditional method, right? It's a really simple process for procurement managers to get generators, compressors, trucks, dozers on one platform. And for suppliers or people who own heavy equipment, they essentially have access to the entire market of demand from one single platform. So I think it's the ease of use and the efficiency of the platform that makes it a compelling purchase or buying decision for clients.
Thank you, Arjun. The next question is for Ed from MEED. What do you think are the main reasons why projects are getting delayed or canceled? Is it due to expectations that demand would be softer or something else?
Thanks for the question. Well, I mean, every project is different, and obviously the demand drivers for each one are different. Obviously, the situation right now is we've seen a large number of projects delayed by COVID-19, which is obviously understandable due to operational reasons. And then again, of course, we've got lower oil prices. So lower oil prices mean that governments have less revenues, fewer revenues, and therefore less money to spend on new projects. And we've seen a reprioritizing of projects as a result of this. And we're seeing governments announce cutbacks in spending this year. If we take away COVID-19 and the oil price factor, in places like the UAE, one part of the issue has been lower demand for or an oversupply in real estate and lower demand for real estate, which has meant that new project activity has slowed. We've got fewer projects coming to the market, which obviously means fewer projects or contracts, because there isn't a demand for new real estate. And you know, if you go to somewhere like I don't know, the power sector, maybe their different demand projections have meant that these power plants that you might have needed before are no longer necessary. So it depends on the project, on the sector, but generally speaking, you know, right now in the short term, the COVID-19 and of course the uncertainty that creates, plus low oil prices are the overriding reason why we're seeing delays in project activity.
Thank you, Ed, for your answer. I have a question for Dmitry, as you know, the construction industry is still behind in terms of technology and technological adoption. What keeps you upbeat, and that you don't, that what you do now will bring positive change in the industry? This is the question, Dmitry, for you.
Okay, thank you for that question. Quite interesting, in fact. What keeps us upbeat? Yes, you're right. The construction industry is, depending on the region, is quite behind adoption of digital technologies. However, if we and we compare them to emerging markets where we currently now, if we say about, let's say, Nordics, the adoption of digital technology is almost 85 to 90% of the cases. So if you go into the market with a construction machine, so 9 out of 10 machines will be equipped with machine control systems or kind of a machine guidance systems. If we go into markets that are emerging at the moment, then, and if we compare, let's say, 2 years ago and now, the tendency is to grow. So the quantity of machines here in emerging markets is much lower, but what we see and what really excites us, that the adoption rate of digital construction is heavily growing. When contractors, they are quite behind the schedule, then the demand is growing on how to speed up the project, just to, first of all, avoid fines, which is understandable. And this situation in the beginning of 2021, I'm sorry, in 2020, it gave us a clear understanding that the slowdown of projects took place. However, the requirement from government was still the same. You have to complete the project within the time given in the contract. Mm. This is interesting situation. So this is exactly the case where any mean that help to develop the project in time could be helpful. This is really exciting.
Yep. Thank you, Dmitry, for your answer. I have a question here for Tendered. Being a member of equipment rental company, my question is, what we will get extra by considering Tendered over actual end user? So this question is from supplier side. Definitely pricing is the main game here. So the question again, what will get extra by considering Tendered over actual end user? This question for you, Arjun.
So that's a really good question. You know, we always get asked, why do you want to go through a marketplace when you can engage directly with the customer or engage directly with the supplier? If I was to pick an example, for example, Musar Cargo Transport, they've been working with us since the very beginning. And now I think a large percentage of their fleet gets rented out through Tendered. And they're just one example of many. The reason they get value working through Tendered is because Tendered works across several different projects for several different companies consistently throughout the year. So you have this reliability, this guarantee that you always have a customer every single month if you go through the Tendered platform. And a lot of your business development work, a lot of your commercial processes can essentially be outsourced to us. So you can do what you're really good at, which is maintain a healthy fleet and provide it to customers through Tendered, who will take care of a lot of the paperwork or the commercial work that is required in every transaction.
Thank you, Arjun, for the answer. We have a question for Ed MEED. What factors do you see would act as major accelerants or accelerators for digitizing the construction industry?
Well, what every client wants, which is lower cost. At the end of the day, we are in a market which is increasingly competitive. We're seeing a lot more contractors, for example, suppliers coming in from China, from other parts of the world, especially as the economies flatline outside the region. And every client wants projects done faster and at a lower cost. So any company that, and the construction industry as a whole is quite is notoriously slow to embrace new technologies. Any contractor or project company in the project space which can embrace new technology, and we're talking here things like 3D printing, Internet of Things, digital twins, drone technologies on their projects, which can integrate these into their project activities, into operations, and can reflect that in lower costs and greater efficiencies. These are going to be a much more greater advantage than the traditional companies which don't embrace these technologies. So, that is really, I think now we're in a very sink or swim atmosphere, and I think those companies which don't embrace these challenges are going to get left behind, frankly speaking. And it's never been a better time, given this crunch period, for companies to revise their strategies and start investing in technology. And indeed, that's what some of the data suggested by Arjun is suggesting in terms of the surveys and polls, and is what's happening around the region. So it's now or never, really, for a lot of companies.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I really appreciate your answer, because again, the pressure is accelerating to accept digitization of everything around us, including the construction, as mentioned by Dmitry. I mean, there is more demand on better security, better visibility on the performance of also the equipment and the performance of the projects. The next question is to Mr. Dmitry. Why to keep operating margins down while there is no mention to the capital margins?
Right, I would rather answer this question in a question format.
Yeah.
It all depends on the company that operates the business. So operating margin or capital margin. So it depends on how do you evaluate the viability of the business. To us, as a company interfacing the construction segment, the most important indicator is this parameter which was just mentioned. Capital margin stands the second. We consider both when we speak to any of the potential customers where we discuss the technology. However, as I mentioned, operational margins, they stay a number one priority. As maybe Arjun mentioned before, this helps to reinvest into new ideas and to reinvest in the business development.
Thank you, Dmitry. Another question, any solutions for generators and AWP?
At this moment in time, we do not have solutions for generators. So what we have at the moment is primarily to control the machines that can be moved or can move.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Question to Arjun. Hello, my question is directed to Mr. Arjun. Thank you for your presentation. I assume that most of the construction companies and equipment owners might not have high level of IT to shift their rental activities from traditional to digital way. So how does Tender handle this situation and help its users with this transition?
I think there are two parts to that question. One, it's really not that difficult. I think a lot of the people in the construction sector are perceived to not have a lot of IT background, but by design, we are all, in the engineering sector, in the construction sector, where we do complex work every day. So being able to manage an order through a website or track documents on your smartphone is not really that difficult. And the reality is, it's an eventuality. I remember my first phone was a Nokia 3310, right? And it was the best phone out there. And gradually, the phone we have is an iPhone. The change happened gradually, and I think you're going to see a similar change in the technologies being adopted by a lot of companies in our sector. And the people in our sector are a lot more competent and a lot more knowledgeable about technology than some other sectors that have no technology aspect to it at all.
Arjun, I received many questions about the IT and how we can today as clients, how we can negotiate the price, because again, the marketplace is a fixed price and the construction is used to negotiation. So how can you allow, negotiation on the marketplace?
Well, the interesting thing is when a procurement manager is negotiating, he is going to get a rate from one person, and then he's going to use that rate to negotiate against another vendor, right? This is because there's no transparency. You have to manually share prices with everybody. But on the marketplace, on the screen, you essentially see the prices of all the different suppliers. These are not tendered prices. These are the prices put out by suppliers. So the people who actually compete on lower rates will get selected more often, and the market will pressurize or influence everybody to adjust their prices. So when you're working in the marketplace, you get a lot of efficiencies. You unlock a lot of efficiencies that reduce the price overall and actually benefit the customer tremendously. So you don't really have to do as much negotiation because the prices you get are coming through competition, through competitive pricing. That being said, if you are working with tendered, you can always give your relationship manager a call and he will work with you to do the best he can to help you.
Perfect. Thank you, Arjun. I think we can take like 2 more questions. We are already behind, 3 Dubai time, but I think we can also take 2 more questions. A question to MEED: how do you find yourself better in comparison with others? They are mentioning B and C here. I would really appreciate if you compare, give us like some hint about the competition.
Well, I'm being recorded here, so I have to be really careful what I say, don't I? Give us try us out, have a look, and then you'll see the difference immediately. That's all I can say. Get in touch with me and I'll arrange a demo, and it is a world of difference, and it's not really even possible to compare them. Just get in touch with me and we can discuss this.
Yeah, thank you. Question to Dmitry: can your solutions be retrofitted to machines sold previously? Would that require special reinstallation kits?
Right. As you can understand, or you already experienced, machine control systems, they might come from the factory where the machine has been manufactured. And we have alliances with a good number of equipment manufacturers like OEMs. But here, what we heavily discuss with Tender is exactly the answer to your question. So we have solutions located here in UAE and in Saudi Arabia. So what we can do is we can install the system, retrofit, other words, on the existing machine and rent it out through Tender platform. This is quite possible. Yes, it will require special installation kits depending on the machine. If you would like to get machine operated in fully automated mode, so it is mainly linked to hydraulics. If it is indicate mode, so it indicates the operator where to go and how to do the job, then it is less complicated installation, and it does not require specific kit for the machine.
Thank you, Dmitry, for the answer. I have plenty of questions. I will take one extra question, and as I promised you, we will get back to you with answers for all your questions. I have the questions here in front of me, and as I promised earlier, we will answer your questions and come back to you. A question that is repeated several times to Arjun about 2 things. First, how do you see the growth with tendered? Are you going to stick to heavy equipment rental? This is the first part. And the second part, how do you compare the growth between Saudi and UAE in general for the business?
Right. You know, we started our business in the, so I'm going to kind of flip it. I'm going to answer the second question first. As I said, we started in the UAE first, and it has been a wonderful experience for us. You know, when you're moving heavy equipment, you want hyper-localized supply and hyper-localized demand, because it's really hard to ship these products from very far, just by design of what this equipment, how much they weigh. So when we started in the UAE, something really interesting about the UAE, there's about $3 million worth of construction per square mile. And the US, for example, is a much larger market. It's a $1 trillion construction market. But there's about $300,000 worth of construction per square mile. So the density of construction is really high in the UAE. And that made it a fantastic incubation space for tender. However, we ventured into the Saudi market, and it's a lot bigger, right? So it's been a little bit of a challenge, but we've had a lot of success working across Saudi Arabia. We started off in Riyadh, then we went to Jeddah, and now we're also in Khobar. So I think each market brings its own challenges, but we are finding the construction growth, especially in rentals, a lot, very promising in Saudi Arabia and UAE, because rentals and an asset-light model, this idea is catching up. Dmitry earlier mentioned about how Nordic countries have 9 out of 10 of their equipment equipped with grade control systems. Another interesting part of Nordic countries is 70% of the equipment on a site is rented, whereas in Saudi Arabia, it's roughly about 15 to 20%, and in UAE, it's about 25 to 30%. But you see there's still a lot of room for growth for the rental industry to grow in this part of the world. And I also think construction is going to be a huge pillar of the economy in these areas because of all the new infrastructure, the roads, the towers, the houses, etc. So we think, we believe the opportunity is high, and we feel the growth challenges in UAE and Saudi are a little different due to the geography of the regions, but they're all going to the top right.
Great. Very quick question. Are you willing to expand your offering to include material handling equipment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in the marketplace, you can actually find 230 different types of equipment. So you can get yellow plant, you know, earthworks equipment. You can also get generators, compressors, light towers, so light equipment. And you can also get material handling equipment. We have all different types of heavy equipment, light equipment to help you with your operational needs. But that is our focus, only equipment. We don't go into material delivery or manpower delivery because we want to be specialists in the sector we choose.
I have a question, maybe the last question for the three. Global Construction Market Insights 2020 to 2026 forecasting is better market growth in Asian markets compared to Middle East. What makes tendered and MEED and Leica choose Middle East market to work with or in?
I would like to answer this really quickly. You know, if you look at the compounded annual growth rate of the construction market in the US, it's roughly about 4.5%. In Europe, it's about 4%. But if you look at the Middle East and Africa, it's about 9%. So that is twice the growth rate of any other part of the world. So even though you have short-term dips due to COVID-19 or oil prices crashing, it's only short-term. The macro trend is still a growth market. And if you look at the historical data and the trend data for all these different markets, we see a lot of opportunity over here. And that's why we picked Saudi Arabia and the UAE as our home markets.
Any ideas from Dmitry, from Edward?
Well, I would fully support Arjun in his saying. The only part for me, which I would add, the potential of the market. Again, I'm making the comparison of different emerging markets in the region I'm responsible for, and the capacity of the market in GCC with the potential to grow is the highest one.
Thank you, Dmitry. Ed?
This is just from the observations.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, MEED, the M and E in MEED stand for Middle East, and we've been set up in the Middle East since 1957. So we are a regional Middle East organization. So we've always been focused on the region, and we always will be. So whether it's up or down, our sort of mandate is to cover economic project developments in the region. So while there may or may not be growth in other parts of the world, this is our focus.
Great, thank you, Ed. Before closing, do you have any comments that would you like to share with the attendees before, closing?
Well, I know we're running out of time, so just a quick comment about digitization, right? I think it's really important. Companies don't think of digitization as only operational digitization, but think about digitization across your business. Think about it in your finance function, your marketing function, your sales function, and think about how you can make those more digitized. Because the advantage of digitizing things is you start collecting data. And if you start collecting data in all your different functions, you can kind of merge it all together, and it can help you make decisions at a corporate level or an organizational level a lot smarter and a lot faster, and will help you become a more sustainable and agile company. So that's just my closing remarks about digitization and market outlook.
Thank you, Arjun. Any other additions would you like to add? Great. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dmitry. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Arjun. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, Why Digitize Construction, Market Outlook and Growth. I believe that we have discussed many important points, very insightful discussion. I've tried to ask as much as possible the questions that I received. As I promised, I will also list these questions, look at these questions, answer them, and again, get back to you with the answers, whether by email or by phone. If we have any questions also for MEED and Leica, we will share with them these questions and get back to you with answers. Our next webinar will be on July 11th. It's about increasing profitability of your fleet. And I will be hosting Mr. Philippe Dupin, as he's a general manager of Mobile, Mr. Muhammad Amin Zaman, he's Dubai branch manager at TUV SUD, and Mr. Yunus Tekle, he is the head of operations at Tender. Thank you again for joining us today. I really enjoyed having you, Ed, Arjun, and Dmitry on this webinar, and I really appreciate your attendance for all attendees, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.